He said, sometimes we need to express anger loudly and hotly, sometimes quietly. Sometimes it's appropriate to say nothing at all. But the whole point is that we need to have all this range of ways of responding and be able to very carefully discriminate between which of those responses is appropriate in this circumstance.
I'm Michael Max, and this is Qiological, the podcast that curates East Asian medicine and methods through the power of conversation. Creation stories, they're powerful. Every religion has one, so does every country. You do too. There's a story of where you come from and how it's contributed to who you are today. There's a myth around how you found your way to being an acupuncturist. Your patients, they have creation stories as well, around their illness, stories that contain the essence of something that eventually had them walking in your door. Creation stories are a kind of psychic DNA. Within their blueprint is a kind of separation of light from dark, order from chaos, freedom from tyranny. There's an aspiration in creation stories, something potent that is yet unfulfilled. But the potential, once it's named, it's now been brought into play. These kinds of stories, they remind us of who we are, aspire to be, and contain the virtues that allow for the unfolding of a life well lived. We all got some kind of story. It could be a prayer, a lament, a grievance, or inspiration. Stories, they're potent. And creation stories, they carry an extra measure. They are the jing of the thoughts frequently entertained. They are foundational, like bones. Often enough, I suspect creation stories are the gravity around which our beliefs, actions, and destiny orbit. Change the story, and I suspect the trajectory of destiny, it might also change. Change the story, and maybe the trajectory of destiny, it might transform as well. My creation story of trotting down the path of East Asian medicine usually starts with a friend who badgered me into getting some acupuncture. But before that was a demonstration of acupuncture when I was in college. I could not have been more disinterested. And prior to that, a trip to a Chinese herbalist that my friends had seen. He gave them bags of bark and stuck needles in their ear. He told me just to massage a couple of points on my head. I felt cheated. Given that from a young age I had an aversion to medicine and doctors, my creation story for being an acupuncturist, it might go something along the lines of resist something long enough and you'll find yourself ending up doing it. And then there's folks like John McDonald, who, when he first caught wind of acupuncture, thought, far out, man, I want to know more about that. That enthusiasm has followed him through his time as a practitioner and even powered him through doing a Ph.D. In this conversation, we'll discuss trickster shamans, the ethics of using the controlling cycle of the 5 phases to influence your patient's emotions, why people with staunch beliefs are the most easily brainwashed, and the curiosity of how the body makes decisions. For sure, it's far out, and I think you'll want to know more right after these words from the folks who make Qiological possible. These conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. Blue Poppy, your new one-stop shop, has speedy shipping options on everything that you need for your clinic. It's Women's Health Month at Mayway Herbs. Check out their new website for learning resources on helping women with herbal medicine. Are you a creature of habit? How about making a change that helps your patients and the planet with AcuFast needles? And later in the show, raising your fees doesn't have to be a difficult process. Jane has helpful suggestions on making it easy and effective. And finally, have you considered that having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things that you can do? Julie Bear Don't Walk has, and she can help you do something about it too. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Qiological website to take advantage of all the special offers our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast. Picture this. Your clinic is buzzing with patients, and then you realize that you're down to your last box of needles. No need for panic, because Blue Poppy, your one-stop shop for all your acupuncture needs, they ship orders received before 3 p.m. on the same day. With a quick visit to Blue Poppy's website, you can order premium needles, herbal formulas, and that special Dr. Bob's oil that your patients love. Blue Poppy understands practitioners can't keep patients waiting. That's why they strive to get you what you need when you need it. From high-quality Chinese herbs and formulations to acupuncture supplies and clinical essentials, Blue Poppy has served practitioners for nearly 40 years with products that meet the highest of standards. Discover everything Blue Poppy has to offer by visiting www.bluepoppy.com, and don't forget to subscribe to their mailing list for exclusive offers and more.
Hi folks, I'm Yvonne Lau, president of Mayway Herbs. May is Women's Health Month, and as a women-owned and women-run business, we especially love how Chinese medicine can support wellness through every stage of a woman's life. So in this month's newsletter and podcast, we're covering topics like PMS, pregnancy, menopause, and osteoporosis. We'll share expert insights and effective treatment strategies you can put to good use in your clinic. Our Plumflower brand line includes herbal tea pills, tablets, extract granules, and organic herbs, all of which you can find on Mayway.com, and where you can also find articles, videos, and other resources to support your practice. Since 1969, Mayway has been a trusted source for high-quality herbal products. In these challenging times, please know that we remain committed to keeping our products accessible and affordable so you can take care of yourself and your patients. As always, thank you for supporting Real Chinese Medicine.
Daily habits and routines feel comforting, familiar, easy, automatic. That's the power of repetition. You've worked out the kinks and can do it with your eyes closed. But what if you shook things up? What if you ditched the old routine and tried something new? Hi, I'm John Sten. I've practiced acupuncture for over 30 years, and together with my wife Kelly, we created the world's first eco-friendly acupuncture needle. The AcuFast earth-friendly needle system cuts your packaging waste by 60 to 90%, depending upon your needle type, speeds up your needling, gives you more control, and best of all, while you're healing patients, we plant a tree for every 2 boxes your clinic uses. Thousands of acupuncturists have already made the switch. In just the last year, they've helped plant over 16,000 trees. Since we started, that number has grown to over 50,000. So break the routine. Be the change. Visit acufastneedles.com. Your patients and the planet will thank you.
John McDonald, welcome to Geological.
Thank you very much, Michael.
I am looking forward to our conversation. We somehow crossed paths, I don't know, Facebook or something, somewhere in the internet. You know how it is these days. Well, I was hanging out on the internet and ran into some sketchy characters. And somehow we had gotten involved in a conversation about a class that was coming up that was talking about looking at the 5 phases and talking about emotions. Mm-hmm. And there was a little chit-chat that we had back and forth, and my thought was, well, this might make a good podcast conversation, in part because, well, emotions is an interesting thing and hard to get your hands around. We talk about it a lot, but, look, none of us are psychotherapists or, experts in that matter. We're experts in something else. Chinese medicine has its own perspective. And in particular, this thing that we were looking at was talking about using the 5 phases as a way to provoke an emotional response. Mm-hmm. And we both thought that was kind of interesting, as I recall. So I'd like to begin with a little bit of your background, how you found your way into acupuncture in the first place, and what it is about emotions in particular that got your attention.
Well, curiously, when I was leaving high school, I was very clear about my career path. And I remember when I had a discussion with a vocational guidance counselor, it was kind of like an arm wrestle. And I was saying, do you have any idea what you'd like to do? I said, yeah, I want to be a psychologist. And they went, oh, well, wouldn't you like to consider this or that or this or that? No, I want to be a psychologist. And so normally their job is to kind of guide you to something, but I was already there and they were trying to bully me out of it. And it was really, really weird. So I went to university and I started studying to be a psychologist. Got to the end of the first year and failed a subject. As it turned out, I found out later, by 1 mark. And because it offended my tutor, he didn't tell me. I didn't like his assessment of Romeo and Juliet, of Anthony and Cleopatra, sorry. He was doing Bradley's Fatal Flaw. And Mark Antony was this noble character with this single flaw, and that was the problem. I said, no. I said, this is Romeo and Juliet for adults. That's the problem. And so you've got people behaving like adolescents, but their behavior is killing thousands of other people because they're powerful people. When Mark Antony, like a teenager, runs away from the battle because he sees his girlfriend leaving, and thousands of people die as a result of that really bad decision. But I said, it's really, their behavior is very similar to that of Romeo and Juliet. But the tragedy is it's not personal. It's not just a family or two. It's whole nations suffering. And he hated me for it. And he insisted I quote the text, so I quoted the text. And so when I failed English by 1 mark, he decided not to tell me as his revenge. So I lost my Commonwealth scholarship for university, and I had to go back part-time to make up another subject. So I was living in a share house with students and nurses. And I think there were 3 psychiatric nurses in this big share house. And one of them said, oh, look, you want to be a psychologist? Well, come and work at the psychiatric hospital over your break, a 3-month break, and get an idea of what it's like on the ground. And you get paid. And sounds good. So I started training as a psychiatric nurse because it was all in-hospital training those days. But you got a full adult wage. And that was so much better than a scholarship. I ate a lot better for that period of time. And at the end of it, I went back part-time, but I stayed nursing. And so I skipped from psychology to psychiatric nursing, but still doing my part-time psychology. Got to the end of the second year of the degree, which is basically halfway through an honours degree, and I discovered acupuncture. And I remember this guy brought a book to a Tai Chi class. And he said, hey, guys, look at this, acupuncture. I said, what's that? He said, well, you know how when you do Tai Chi, you can feel the energy flowing through the body? Well, someone's made a map of the lines the energy runs along, and there's points on them. You stick needles in and it cures diseases. This is 1971, okay? So I said, far out, man, I got to know more about that. And now it's 2024, and I'm still saying, far out, man, I got to know more
Far
about
out, man.
that. Because it's such an extraordinary idea. I often find it amazing that students don't get just how extraordinary it is that acupuncture exists, that you can actually put needles in points and it has effects on the whole body. That is just gobsmackingly amazing. And so some people just sort of walk right past that and don't even notice. And I go like, guys, do you realize how amazing it is that this stuff actually works, that it exists? So that started me on my acupuncture journey. And so I reached a point where I was doing part-time uni, I was working full-time, I was studying acupuncture, and I was chastised by the psychologist for going to sleep in a therapy session. He said it made the patients feel like they weren't important.
Yeah, that's funny. But I'm sure you could see his point.
Yeah, he was right, but I was just burning the candle at both ends and in the middle, and something had to give. And so he took me aside and said, like, something's got to change here because this can't keep going. And so I said, yeah, I get it. So I dropped the uni and kept going with the acupuncture and kept going with the nursing because that was now my income. So as soon as I was able, I started to teach and to practice and moved to part-time nursing and then left nursing altogether and went on a trip to South America. There was a conference.
South America?
South America, yeah.
From Australia?
Yeah. So there was a
conference
in Argentina, an acupuncture conference. I thought, oh, what a great opportunity.
And wait a minute. What year is this?
1976.
1976. Acupuncture conference in Argentina.
Yeah. So that was WASA, the World Acupuncture Society of Acupuncture at that time. So they were trying to be the big noise, and they were sort of arm wrestling with the SIA, the Société Internationale d'Acupuncture, which was the French. And so the SIA and WASA were sort of thugging it out to be king of the mountain of acupuncture in the world.
It sounds like a soccer match.
It was. And China was not in the picture because the bamboo curtain was still up, so no one was going in or out. So China wasn't included. So there I met Nguyen Van Ni and a number of other people. And the idea was that I was going to go to the acupuncture conference, and then I was just going to cruise around South and North America for a year. That was the plan.
Yeah, why not? You're already over on this side.
Didn't quite make it because the doctor that I was in a clinic with in partnership was the deal was I would pay for half the expenses, he would pay for half the expenses, and when it came to the point where my expenses were paid off, he would start paying me. But when it came that time, he suddenly felt reluctant about paying me. So I learned something. When somebody says to you frequently, "I've transcended money," watch your wallet. The guy's a thief.
Watch me transcend your money.
Yeah.
You know, you really don't need money. You know, a lot of like the gurus and, you know, people that ran communes and stuff back in the States, they kind of ran that scam. It's like money. You don't need money. Here, give it to us because you don't need it, right? We'll put it to a good use. We promise.
Yeah. So,
So you got a lesson in financial responsibility.
Yeah. So the way that it was working is we had a scheme at that stage called Medibank, which later transformed into Medicare. But our Medicare is for everybody. It's not just for seniors. Medibank was paying doctors to do acupuncture back in the early 70s. And so all the money came in, all the treatments I did was a nurse working under the guidance of a doctor, and so everything was in his name. So the money came to him, and then it was up to him to pass it on, and he didn't really. So I got a little bit, and then he destroyed the records and left town, basically. So I ran out of money and had to come home after 6 months. But it was still a great 6 months. So I'm very into history and archaeology, so I loved the Inca fortress of Sacsayhuaman. That was just amazing. Machu Picchu, just spectacular. And I also spent 3.5 months in Brazil, up in the northeast, or Salvador da Bahia de Todos Santos do Brasil, which is the first colony. It was the founding colony of the Portuguese colonies in South America. And these days people just call it either Salvador or Bahia. And I spent 3.5 months there, and I was a tourist, and I taught Tai Chi at a local macrobiotic restaurant, the Grand Jiahois, the rice grain. The deal was I taught Tai Chi, and they gave me free meals. Worst deal I ever made. Their food was terrible.
Yeah, but look, you're young, you're traveling, it's food in your belly, it's a chance to do something that you enjoy.
Yeah.
What a great life. I mean, really, what a great life.
Well, one of those people I taught, I've actually connected with again about 10 years ago. I just got this random message on Facebook going like, "Were you in Salvador in 1976? I'm like, "Yeah, who is this?" And he goes, "Oh, you won't remember me. It's Jama." "Oh, Jama, of course I remember you." And he is now a professor of acupuncture in Belo Horizonte. So I feel like I planted a seed. So that was nice.
It's curious how these things happen.
Yeah. So we still keep in touch. Yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Wow. Okay. I need to unpack this just a little bit here.
Yeah.
Holy smokes. That's what you get on a podcast. You ask a simple, innocent question, and a whole world opens up. I thought we are going to jump immediately into talking about emotions, but now we're having a little history podcast. I didn't expect this, but here we go.
Yeah.
Okay. You're a kid, and you're in high school, and you're like, psychology. Yeah, that's it, man. I'm doing it. Yeah. Most kids I know in high school, me included, they had no idea what they wanted to do, right? How are you, this kid in high school, like all raring to go on psychology?
Well, I won a couple of book prizes, and the books I bought were on psychology. And the one that really caught my attention was one on propaganda and brainwashing.
Oh
And
my God.
essentially, what really caught my attention was it focused particularly on army chaplains in Korea who were turned and became public advocates for communism and did all these newsreels praising communism and decrying the Western capitalism and Christianity and all this sort of stuff. And that really shocked and horrified people because they thought, wow, like if you can turn a priest, you can turn anybody. But it turns out that's not true. Priests are easy to turn than anybody else. That's what they found out.
Because they were empathetic?
No, because the difference in the belief structure of a rabid communist is almost exactly the same as a dedicated Christian. And so you take the shape of the personality, you take all that devotion and all of that unquestioning loyalty, and you just flip a little bit at the top. And so instead of God, now you got communism, but everything else is the same. And so you can't turn a disinterested, apathetic guy into a fanatical anything. You can turn him into a different sort of apathetic guy if you try hard enough. But when you stop putting pressure on, he'll just go back and do what he was doing before. And that's exactly what happened. And so the servicemen and women who were subjected to tremendous pressure, under pressure, they played along. And as soon as the pressure was off, people said, well, what do you think of that? And they went, hey, I had to do that at the time, but, it was all rubbish. No, it's nonsense. I didn't believe a word of it. But what did the priests do? Well, the priests got back to America and founded the Christian Anti-Communism Crusade because it was so dangerous, because they were brainwashing people, and brainwashing was really powerful and really dangerous. And so that was their reaction, because they couldn't accept that they had been turned. And even more horrifying to them was the idea that the Christian bit of their personality and belief structure was so really peripheral. It wasn't actually the core of their being at all. The core of their being was being somebody who was absolutely committed to something.
A soldier in the army of, well, army of the day, army of the cause.
They just changed the general, and everything else is the same. And
Yes.
that was
Wow.
that was really scary to them, because that shook the foundations of how they saw themselves.
Of course it would, wouldn't it? So you read this as a teenager, and that set you off thinking, psychology. That's fascinating.
Absolutely. And I would add my mother, when I was, about 7, she was a member of the local chapter of the Christian Anti-Communism Crusade. And it was, McCarthyism, Reds under the bed, it kind of all went
Mm-hmm.
together very nicely. And so the Christian church was very happy to sort of jump on the McCarthy bandwagon and tell everybody about the dangers of brainwashing. But basically, brainwashing means it's really easy to convince somebody of something they already believe.
Oh, that sounds right.
Yeah. And so if you're trying to
Yes.
convince somebody of something that is alien to their belief structure, you got Buckley's. It's just not going to happen.
I think this is how really good negotiators work too.
Yeah.
You know, they let other people have your way.
Well, you tell people what they want to hear. And that's been the basis of a lot of, I think they call it populist politics. Uh,
Mm.
tell people what they want to hear, and they'll believe you.
Yeah. Well, they're already that because they already believe it.
Yeah. So at that point, I developed the delusion, which I was later disabused, that psychologists actually knew a whole lot about why people do what they do, how people tick, what makes them work. And I later found out, no, actually they know a lot more about the habits of rats in Skinner boxes, because that's what they do. And then they try to extrapolate that to human behavior. And of course, as soon as they do, they get slapped down by letters to the editor in the journal going, you didn't prove that at all. And so the one that really stuck in my mind, and this is sort of what caused me to leave psychology, was a guy who spent 30 years trying to prove there was a maternal instinct using white female Wistar rats. And so he got these mother rats and got them to run across a grid to their young and kept turning the power up until it killed them. And so he ran this experiment with thousands and thousands of rats over 30 years and eliminated all these drive factors. So they weren't hungry, it wasn't sex drive, it wasn't, in fact, it was even stronger than survival. And so he then published his monumental work saying, I have now proven there is a maternal instinct and it's stronger than survival drive. And of course, immediately the letters to the editor started piling in. No, you haven't. You've proven there's an unknown drive factor previously unidentified in female Wistar rats. Let's call it drive factor D for the sake of discussion, but we can't speculate on the nature of drive factor D because that's not science. So observe human behavior, fine, record human behavior, but as soon as you try to interpret it, you've just stepped out of psychology and into philosophy, and you're no longer a scientist. And that, to me, was intensely frustrating as an idea to be a psychologist, because whatever you investigated, you couldn't say anything about and still be a scientist.
But you were interested in this other side of it. I mean, what about like the great psychotherapists? The Milton Ericksons, the Adlers, the Jungs, the Freuds, these people that they're kind of artists and observers and intensely curious about human behavior and how humans interact with each other.
Yeah.
That's a whole other side of psychology, not air quotes here scientific. It's not a Skinnerian box, but it's a thing.
Oh yeah, I was particularly attracted to the writings of Jung. I had a few of his books, but that was mainly because of his profound interest in symbols and in the unconscious and in how religions worked. I found his stuff really interesting. So, I retained my interest in emotions and how people tick, but became convinced that if you want to know how people tick, you're probably going to learn more by reading novels, listening to music, looking at art, because the songwriter probably has a better insight into human nature than most laboratory psychologists. And so I just kind of felt like, I do want to know a lot more about how people tick, but I'm looking in the wrong place here. I need to look somewhere else.
It's funny how it goes, isn't it? We have an impulse towards something. We start down a path.
Yeah.
And the path takes us a ways, and sometimes like, oh yeah, there's something here, or it takes you a ways, and it's like, oh, there's something else here.
Yeah.
You got lucky. You got to actually go make money and do some work and see how this stuff worked, boots on the ground.
Yes. The other thing, within the hospital system, the work that psychologists did wasn't really of great interest. I didn't like the job description of a psychologist in a hospital. So, but the acupuncture I kept going with, and I'm very glad I did. And then when I came across other ideas about emotions and emotional therapies within traditional Chinese medicine, again, that sort of really caught my attention. So the concept of applying 5 elements to emotions really interested me. And so that was, we're talking Zhang Songjung or Zhang Zihe was the guy that developed this therapy, and then it was further elaborated by Judan Shi or Zhu Jinheng. And so they're like, that's Jin and Yuan dynasties, so 1100s, 1200s, around there. Somewhere along the line, I came across the term living noose therapy, but Lorraine Wilcox was asking me where I got it from, and I couldn't find it. So I don't know where the term came from. But use emotion to overcome emotion is sort of another common way to describe the theory. And so in short, the theory was to deliberately provoke an emotional response in somebody in order to have an impact on their current emotional state, so to move them out of where they are. And so there are these wonderful stories. A few of them people can find in Elisa Rossi's book, Shen. She's got a few of the stories of Zhang Zihe in there. And like one of the most famous is about an emperor who was obsessed and wouldn't come out of his bedchamber. And so this doctor approached the royal physicians and said, look, I know how to cure this guy. So, give me a go. My methods are unconventional. So like, give me my head and just don't don't ask questions. And so what was happening was the prime minister would go to the emperor's chamber every morning, and he would call out to the emperor, "May I come in, Your Majesty?" "No, you can't. Go away." And that was it. And so he came with this guy, and he said, "Well, look, it's not going to work very well because he's just going to tell you to go away." So he strode forward, ripped open the bed curtains, and told the emperor to get his butt out there on the throne because he had a job to do, which of course was so horrendously outrageous. The way the official story is told is not quite as colourful as that. He trod on the emperor's clothes. That was really, really terrible. Basically, he deliberately enraged the emperor, and the anger broke through the obsession. And so the emperor sort of ordered his immediate execution and bounced out of bed and said, "Well, what's for breakfast? I'm hungry," indicating, of course, that his spleen was sort of back in action. And there's two endings to the story. One was that the emperor was pretty fast on his feet and realised that this man had risked his life to save the emperor's health, and sent word to stay the execution and rewarded him. And the other one, well, the rewards were posthumous because the emperor was a bit slower on the uptake. That's the story. It makes someone angry to break through rumination and obsession and constant sort of circular worry that doesn't go anywhere, like digestion that never actually digests anything. So it's how it sort of links to, in my mind, to sort of stomach spleen. Is digestion doesn't go anywhere, like rumination. It just goes round and round. It doesn't.
Stirred up with a little wood.
Yeah. There's a whole series of those, of course, about essentially using the curse cycle of the five elements to have an emotional impact. And when you read the stories carefully, you find out that some of them don't even follow that rule. They're sort of a little bit loose, that they don't always use the curse cycle. But there's a whole series of very entertaining stories there about how deliberately emotions were being provoked. I've had long discussions with a friend who's actually originally he was a naturopath, and at one stage he and I were both deans of faculty at the same college. So he was dean of naturopathy, I was dean of Chinese medicine, and so when we went out for coffee, we'd say, "Oh, here we go, we're the co-deans," and then my friend said, "No, we're the paracodeans." Yeah.
The paracodeans.
Because we're paramedical. Anyway, that was that little joke. He went off and studied medicine, and now he's a professor of medicine. And we've had some long discussions about the possibilities of trying to transpose some of those ideas into an actual practical modern therapy. And we keep coming up against the problem of the difference between the shaman and the modern psychiatrist. And so the shaman was mysterious, the shaman was powerful, the shaman did things that people didn't understand or might not have approved of.
They were tricky.
But
They were tricky characters.
but he was allowed to trick people.
Mm.
It was expected. And if he tricked people, then obviously it was for their own good. However, in modern psychiatry, trickery is just out. It's not considered appropriate because you have to maintain rapport and trust, and you have to empower the client. And so the whole idea of the psychiatrist being powerful or tricking the patient for their own good is just kind of like out the window. So not quite sure how it can be used, but I still find the idea interesting. And that also then leads me to the idea that we can probably manipulate our own emotions using some of the same ideas. So we can do it to ourselves because we're allowed to trick ourselves, if that's possible. I'm not quite sure it is, but we're allowed to do stuff to ourselves because that's our own backyard. Just gets a bit dodgy if we start doing it to other people. But from there, it became, okay, so what do these emotional energies, what do they look like when they're working really well? Because to say, anger injures the liver, okay, well, anger and frustration and being short-tempered is kind of an indication of the liver not working well. But what does that look like when it's working really well? And in particular, that sort of 1970s thing of, get rid of anger, get rid of fear. That's a really bad idea because the energy that is involved with anger is really important energy, and we need it. It's a resource, we need it. And so anger is often something that will propel us to do something about things that we've just been tolerating for a long period of time. And then one day we get really angry and we do something about it, and we actually solve the problem. We resolve the issue. And so that's a really useful energy that moves us to create change. And if we don't have that, then there's a lot of things that we'd never get around to doing.
This episode is brought to you by Jane, the clinic management software that honestly just makes running a practice easier. Let's dive into something that's never easy, but sometimes necessary: raising your fees. It can feel awkward, right? But here's a tip that can really help. Consider offering flexibility to your patients as you introduce the change. When patients face new fees, it's natural for them to feel uncertain or concerned. That's where flexibility can really make a difference. Offering options like a phased increase, suggesting a payment plan, or even taking a moment to talk things through can help to ease the transition. These thoughtful gestures show your patients that you're listening and care about them, which strengthens the trust you've worked so hard to build. If you're looking for more ideas on how to navigate these kinds of changes, head to frontdesk.jane.app and check out the article, How to Tell Clients You're Raising Your Fees. One last thing, if you're ready to give Jane a try, you can use the code CHIOLOGICAL for a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. Yes, because we have crappy boundaries. And we're impinged upon by all kinds of influences of the people around us.
Yeah.
I had a teacher explain this, Chinese medicine teacher, explain this anger thing very similar way, saying, look, anger is, and the same idea. Look, at that point I was living in Seattle, went to school in Seattle. I spent a lot of my life there. We're very nice in Seattle. Anger is not an okay thing. So we're very nice in Seattle. At least we were back then. I don't know about these days. Probably still nice. But it was tough to be okay with anger. And the way this teacher explained it was, look, if someone's on your toes, and it hurts because they're on your damn toes, and you ask them to get off nicely and they don't, and you tell them to get off and they don't, and you tell them a little more forcefully and they're still on your toes, and then you explode and you push them off your feet. Okay, now you solved the problem. Anger did its job. Now, if you continue to be angry that they were on your toes, that's another problem. But that explosive moment of, this is mine, you're in my space, and out you go, that solves a lot of problems. And it's very helpful, especially if you have problems like you were saying with being angry. Anger is a bad thing. You can't do that. Well, now you've just cut yourself off from a very useful and very motivating and powerful and effective resource.
Yeah, absolutely. So I like acronyms, and so I developed one for my students, which was ABCDEF. Always be creative, dynamic, effective, and flexible. That's wood working well. Because
ABCDEF is wood working well. I love it.
That's the thing about wood is, wood works well when it's flexible. You read this stuff in the Tao Te Ching, you read it in Sun Tzu's Art of War. The army without flexibility never wins a battle. The hard old tree breaks in the storm, but the willow bends, and then comes back totally unaffected. And and so we saw that with the storms we had here recently. It was the hard old trees that all broke. So the idea that wood gives us our flexibility and our ability to solve problems, basically, because flexibility means that if one way of going doesn't work, then we try something else that does work. And there's a fantastic quote that I often use in my lectures on emotions from M. Scott Peck, the guy that wrote The Road Less Traveled. Interesting guy. He was a theologian and a psychiatrist. And part of his background was he was on the My Lai massacre investigation committee, and he asked a lot of questions about whether or not there's such a thing as evil, and if there is, what is it? Really interesting. So People of the Lie was the sort of main work he wrote about that. But in Road Less Travelled, he talked about how it was necessary to have a very sophisticated and flexible system for expressing anger. And he said sometimes we need to express anger loudly and hotly, sometimes quietly, sometimes it's appropriate to say nothing at all. But the whole point is that we need to have all this range of ways of responding and be able to very carefully discriminate between which of those responses is appropriate in this circumstance. And so I really like that idea of needing to have this whole array of ways of responding with regard to anger. That really sort of struck a chord with me.
It sounds right. I had no idea he was a Chinese medicine doctor. I mean, I know he wasn't, but he sounds like one. You know, being able to describe these different kinds of anger, that sounds like very clear thinking Chinese medicine differentiation of different kinds of wood qi.
Absolutely. So, here's another sort of source that I like to quote because he says some really interesting things. Similarly with, okay, so fear. So what's that? Well, getting rid of fear is not a good idea, but practicing tranquility is. Because the more you practice tranquility, the less reason you have to get angry. And I like to use the analogy of a roundabout. I don't know if you've got a lot of roundabouts in America, but
we have a few.
We do here. And of course, that's always where people come in to dispute. And I sort of say to my students, how common is liver cheesesteak nation? And they kind of look at me and I go, well, have you driven a roundabout lately? Because there you sort of see it laid bare. As you've got these people who always imagine that they have the right of way no matter what's going on in the roundabout. And so my analogy is this, is you get up in the morning, you do your meditation, your Tai Chi, your tranquility exercise, whatever it is. And then you get in your car and you drive. And somebody cuts you off in the roundabout. And you hope that their day gets better. And you drive on. You don't do your tranquility exercises. You get up late. You're late for work. You're in a bit of a tiz. You get in the car, and somebody cuts you off at the roundabout, and you're swearing and cursing and shaking your fist, and you're having a bad day. And so that's the difference the tranquility exercise makes. It's about who's having the bad day. Is it that guy or is it you? And so practicing tranquility, I find it interesting now that there's quite a few first responders, police forces, etc., that do meditations before people go out on shift. Because if a police officer has done tranquility exercises before going out there, they're much less likely to take their own issues into the field and project them onto other people. And so they're going to be dealing with other people's problems instead of their own. And I think that's a great initiative. It's really nice.
It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it is. That's kind of my take on that is if you look at each of the emotional states or each of the elements, then you're looking at what they contribute, how to use those resources, as opposed to them being problems that you have to solve. And so that goes for all of the elements. And like lung, if you think about it, the principal function of the lungs physiologically is to expel waste, and colon similarly. And so what triggers breathing is actually a buildup of carbon dioxide. That's what makes you breathe. So it's not a need for oxygen. It's the need to expel waste gas, carbon dioxide. And so in nursing, one of my least favorite jobs was recovery room. And so I don't know what nursing practice is these days, but in those days, someone's recovering from an anesthetic. And so, of course, the anesthetic has stopped them breathing because it's taken out all the muscles that they used to breathe with. And so as they're recovering, you're waiting for them to breathe again. So you stand next to the patient with an oxygen mask and you put the mask on until they pink up. And then you take the mask off and you wait. And if they don't breathe, but they start going blue, put the mask back on again. If you just put the mask on, they might never breathe again because there's no trigger. There's no physiological trigger to make them breathe. What makes them breathe is the carbon dioxide. And so you have to take the mask off and let it build up. And that's what triggers breathing. And so it's really nerve-wracking because breathe, no, not yet, breathe. And you're kind of going like, is this person going to breathe or not? Because if they don't, they're dead. And so that sort of it's fine line between life and death is sort of like right there. And you're staring it in the face. It's really quite confronting. If you don't let them go without oxygen and build up their carbon dioxide for a while, then it doesn't trigger the apneustic center in the brain to make them breathe. So it's really important. So the lungs' main function is expelling waste, same as the colon, which is why they're paired. And so it's all about letting go of the stuff you don't need. And that's your grieving process and a whole lot of other stuff like that. It's about letting go and expelling waste. And I love that there's a line it's in the Il Savith translation of the Suwen, and it says that the function of the large intestine is like the official in charge of creating evolution and change. And oh yes, that's great. Get rid of the crap, create something new, and that really I like that quote. I've seen other translations, but that translation just sort of really rings.
Beyond that, John, I mean, I'm thinking about this physiologically with the lung, and I get it. Totally makes sense. I think about this also really with any of the, I'm going to call it spirits or emotions or functions of any of the organs, that we want the organ, we want the person, we want their chi itself to do what needs to be done. Our job isn't to fix it for them.
Yeah.
It's to create the conditions and the circumstances that, oh, now I'm breathing on my own. Or that rotten bastard, oh, now there's some anger that's broken up some stagnation. So often, I don't know how it is over there in Australia. Here in the United States, the idea is when you go to see some kind of medical practitioner, they are there to fix you, ideally without too much participation on your part.
Yeah.
But, like get the job done. And like you were saying earlier, we're not supposed to trick our patients. But it seems to me our job is certainly not to do it for them, but to, in some way, spark them doing it for themselves, to entice them, maybe sometimes trick them. I mean, I studied psychology a little bit. I wasn't so into this Skinnerian thing, but like some of the great psychotherapists, the Carl Whitakers, the family systems stuff, some of the things that Gregory Basin was talking about, Milton Erickson. These guys were wicked, brilliant tricksters. You could sit in Milton Erickson's presence. He would just tell you a story, and now you've lost your taste for tobacco. Really interesting people that knew something about connecting with folks in a way that would get them breathing different, so to speak.
Well, I recall a particular case of a lady with liver chi stagnation, and she told me that she cooked after working a full-time job, went home and cooked 5 separate meals, one for each member of her family every night. And I was really quite shocked. She said, "This is really onerous, and I really don't like doing it, but I have to because otherwise I'm a bad mother." And so I said, "Look, why don't you try this as an idea? If you're going to cook 5 separate meals, then why don't you cook the same meal for everybody on 5 separate nights? but everybody gets a night to choose. And so each family member, so dad gets to choose Monday night and older son gets to choose Tuesday night. And whatever that choice is, everybody eats the same meal. So we're only actually cooking one meal on each occasion. And she said, yeah, but there's 2 days left over. What do you do with that? I said, well, one night you eat out and the other one is takeaway. Oh, sorry, no, one night is your choice, cook's choice, and the other one is a takeaway or eat out. And she said, oh, that sounds like a wonderful idea, but gee, I don't think my family will go. I think they'll think I'm a really bad mother. I said, would you like to try it? She said, I'd love to try it. So she had the meeting with the family, and they went, oh, Mum, we had no idea that was really hard for you. Terribly sorry. We're very thoughtless of us. Of course, that's fine, because everybody's still getting to choose their meal, but they're also getting to eat other people's choices at the same time. And so they embraced it, and they were very happy with it. And next time I saw her, she had a different haircut. And I went, I see some shift here.
She had a different haircut.
And she was so happy with the difference. And so suddenly it was like, well, I can think about changing anything now. There's nothing that I'm not allowed to think about changing. And it was really important for her. So she did it. She was the one that did it, but I sort of provided the spark, and she ran with it. And so, of course, there's every chance that I would have made that suggestion and nothing would have happened from it. But I was really pleased to see that on that one memorable occasion that somebody found the advice useful and really ran with it. And just kept running. And once they got running, they just kept running.
A new haircut and jogging shoes, too.
Yeah, absolutely.
John, I suspect that for many people that we see, the story that you just told this woman, well, I can't XYZ because then I will be something I don't want to be. All right, fill in the blank. I cannot XYZ because fill in the blank. I think we see this a lot with our patients. Similar, different stories, similar structure. And it's amazing when things shift just a little bit and they can let go of whatever that thing is that, oh, I will be fill in the blank. And they have a different relationship with that. All kinds of other things change. So that was just a little bit tricky on your part.
Not really. There was an awareness of I wasn't doing something of which she was unaware. Interesting that in psychiatry, sometimes tricking people is the only solution that works. And again, it's shamanistic. So I was reading in an anthropology magazine about an Indigenous Australian man who had been hit by a car and he'd injured his hip. So he was hospitalised for a period of time. I think he broke his pelvis or something of that nature. And after his discharge, on follow-up, they were saying, well, your healing is complete, but he insisted that he couldn't walk. And so they sent him to the psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist challenged him and said, you're just malingering, you're faking it, just get up and walk. And of course, that didn't work.
Imagine that.
His tribe, and part of the background was that he'd imagined that he was going to receive enough compensation to buy a yacht, a fancy car, and live in luxury for the rest of his life. But he didn't get anything like that. He didn't even get enough to buy a second-hand car out of it. And so he felt he'd been cheated. So his tribe called in a medicine man from a distant tribe. And the medicine man demanded a fee, which was quite steep. He said, pay up front or I don't come. And so this young man had to pay a significant amount of money for this medicine man to come. So the medicine man then examined him in front of the whole tribe. And he said, yep, I can see exactly what's wrong with you. You have a goanna spirit trapped in your hip. A goanna is a type of Australian lizard. You've got a goanna spirit trapped in your hip. Now, I'm going to remove it. And after I remove it, it'll probably take about 2 weeks for you to fully recover. And then he performs a bit of sleight of hand and pulls a dead goanna from somewhere, throws it in the fire, goes, well, that's it, done. In 2 weeks' time, you'll be good as new. Now, that had an interesting set of consequences, one of which was he was announcing to the tribe that this guy had better be walking normally in 2 weeks or he's now a malingerer. And within that culture, malingering is absolutely not tolerated. You get thrown out of the tribe, you get expelled for malingering. And so he was put on notice. You got 2 weeks to fix this guy or you're done, because everybody has seen you be cured. But the interesting thing was that the first thing that the shaman did was met his reality and said, yep, you're right. You do have a problem that is stopping you from walking. It's real. You're not faking it. You really have a real problem. I agree with you. And now your real problem is gone. So shape up, guy. And so within 2 weeks, he was walking normally. That could never be achieved by a psychiatrist challenging him and telling him he was faking it. And I've seen how badly that's gone. I had a particular case of a woman who said she couldn't walk. She was the wife of a Middle Eastern diplomat in the consulate. They lived upstairs and all of the official business took place downstairs. But if she couldn't come downstairs, then she couldn't host all of these functions. And so she couldn't walk. And so he dragged her off to the psychiatrist to get her fixed. And of course, she didn't want to be fixed. And so right from the get-go, it was just a complete disaster. This lady the psychiatrist ordered that we were not to assist her to the dining room. She had to get there under her own steam. So what did she do? She got out of bed, crawled across the floor into the corridor and lay across the corridor, calling out piteously for help. So the other patients started to help her. And then the nurses were intervening, trying to stop the patient from helping her. And then the patients started abusing the staff for being so heartless and discompassionate to leave this poor woman lying helpless on the floor. And it just became a complete circus. Of course, the woman was discharged back home with a smile on her face, still unable to walk.
Yes, well, you can't solve the problem when the problem is the solution.
So, interestingly, shamanism can do things that psychiatry can't. But I'm not quite sure where that leaves us in terms of what we are able to do as practitioners.
Having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things you can do as a healthcare practitioner. Because a robust business is the ultimate expression of vital qi. And that's the heart of our medicine. I'm Julie Bairdontlock, and I help practitioners grow nourishing, profitable, authentic businesses that embody the generative cycle of Chinese medicine. This isn't about all yang all the time. It's about expanding your own internal capacity, growing collaborative relationships with your patients for ethical patient retention, and marketing as an extension of this medicine, not a necessary evil. You already know that everything is connected in your patients' lives and bodies. The same is true for your business. When we align your systems, your schedule, your pricing, and your offerings with you, we create flow, which means more spaciousness, more impact, and more joy. When you are in the flow, fully resourced in terms of chi, time, and money, your business becomes a source of healing, not just for your patients, but for you. Let's grow something rooted, radiant, and real. Visit lifeflowconsulting.com to learn more.
That was just a question I was coming up to, because, look, I don't know if I want to put myself in the position of pulling some kind of wild trickster thing, because, look, that could backfire, and then you're in deep trouble. If it works, great. But if it doesn't work, not so great.
Yeah.
However, that being said, one of the things that I very much appreciate about the perspectives that we have through Chinese medicine, in this case in particular, the 5 phases and those dynamics of creation and of control. I mean, it's the original model of homeostasis when you think about it. So it seems to me that we can, without resorting to being wild, maybe dangerous tricksters, that we can work within our ballywhack, so to speak, because we know something of the influence of metal on wood. And so if someone has some very excessive wood, there might be things that we could do with the metal that would be useful. From our point of view, well, that's just the way the world works. But if you don't know this, it might look like magic.
Well, there's one scenario where I could imagine it might work. To use that curse cycle thing would be in a violent hostage situation. And so you've got a domestic violence issue. A man is holding maybe his wife and kids, or maybe his ex-wife and kids at gunpoint, and the police negotiators are trying to negotiate with him. And so rule number one is don't provoke fear, because if you provoke fear, then that's going to be likely to trigger anger and violence. And so you want to stay away from being frightening, but try to get the guy in touch with the original sense of loss that caused his fear, that led to his anger. And if you can really get him in touch with his loss, it'd be a very delicate thing. But if you could get him feeling his loss, then his anger would dissipate, because he would then realize that he wasn't really angry, he was grieving. And that would possibly diffuse the situation. Again, it's a very delicate and tricky thing, and it could backfire terribly. But that's a thought that I once had, that maybe putting an angry person in a violent situation in touch with their grief, their sense of loss, because if you've got nothing to lose, you've got nothing to fear. And so all fear is born out of loss, or a fear of loss. And so if you've got nothing to lose, you've got nothing to fear. That's the concept behind the Tibetans with their Book of the Dead. If you can face your fear of death, you can face any fear, because there's no loss greater and more comprehensive than death. So I have that kind of in the back of my mind as an idea that might be an application that might work.
Perhaps. Now, that's a pretty high-stakes situation. Let me run one by you. This is somebody I saw recently in my clinic. They came in because ostensibly they were angry. And I could see on this person's face, you can kind of face read a little. There's certain ways that people that are angry, they habitually hold their face. They get those little furrows between the eyebrows, and sometimes there's a hardness in the eyes. And so this person is talking about, I'm here because I'm angry, and everyone says I'm angry, and I need to do something about my anger. And then they proceeded to weep for the next 20 minutes. The person said something about, well, maybe I'm just covering up for my sadness. And I thought, I wonder if you are. And then they wept for 20 minutes. And I'm thinking, this is interesting. They think they're angry. Everybody around them thinks they're angry. They do have expressions of being angry, I'm sure. But I think beyond anger, they're actually more sad than angry. That was my working hypothesis. And so my treatment was to boost up the energies of the heart. Because I'm thinking maybe a little joy, a little love, a little heart fire might help to control that sadness. Maybe that will shift the anger. I don't know. I recently saw them. I haven't seen them yet for a follow-up. But I think in part because I knew that we were going to be having this conversation, these ideas were running around in the back of my mind.
Right.
And this was a case where, again, I don't know if I'm seeing it clearly, but I certainly did take that approach to see what might happen.
Sure. Well, use joy to break through grief that's another one of the set of stories, and there's sort of the 2 or 3 sort of folk tales around that suggest that works.
Yeah, there's all, and you find those stories. I mean, you find it in Sufi teaching stories, and you find it in like Greek mythology. I mean, these stories are all over the place. One of the things that I love about acupuncture, and this kind of underscores what you said earlier about, far out, man, I need to know more about that. There are things that we can do with acupuncture. We don't have to tell the story. I mean, maybe if you're good at stories and you see it clearly, and you got a knack for working with people, you could tell the story, and the story might help. But if you're not that great with stories, or you want it to come from inside the patient, we can use needles that tell that story. And then the patients do it themselves.
My view fundamentally about how acupuncture works at a base level is that we remind the body to do stuff that it already knows how to do. And there's no action of acupuncture that doesn't somehow recruit a system, a mechanism, a process that the body's already familiar with and knows how to do. And so in one sense, when you look at that, it's kind of like you sort of look at the body and go like, hey, body, why did I have to ask? Why did I have to remind you to do that stuff? You know how to do it. So why weren't you just doing it without me having to ask? And so the question really becomes then like that, my God, how is it possible for illness to happen? Because the body's got all these amazing systems to deal with creating balance. And so it's almost as amazing that disease can exist, given how many ways we've got to deal with it. And so if we do ask and the body does what it knows how to do, then again, why didn't it do that without being asked? That's a mystery.
I think that's a very important question. And I want to stick with this for a moment, because I say similar things to my patients when they ask me about how acupuncture works. That, look, there's something innate that you have, and the acupuncture has the ability to call it forth because the body knows how to take care of itself. Well, of course you get the wise guy the wise guy patient who's like, well, then why didn't my body already have it taken care of? Which is a damn good question.
Yeah.
I think it's really a great question, because in practicing acupuncture, I think many of us, we rely on that story. We have that perspective. The body has the capacity. Well, if it's got the capacity, how did it misplace that capacity? Did it forget? Was it blocked? What happened? It's like, you said it really well. There are so many ways that the body can take care of itself. It's surprising that it wouldn't. And I'm really curious about that myself. And I don't have a great answer.
I find when my Ph.D. was in allergic rhinitis, and so we're looking at what changes in biomarkers correlated with changes in symptoms. I was basically interested in putting under the noses of allergy specialists, hey, this stuff is real. Here is change you can recognize that correlates with the improvements in symptoms. And so improvement in symptoms isn't enough for you. So here's what happens to the IgE, here's what happens to the substance P, etc. And I sort of, in thinking about it and in the stuff that I was reading and writing and developing the thesis and writing publications, I came to this sort of view that allergy, cancer, and autoimmune disease are all pivoted around the same problem, and that's disorders of friend and foe recognition. And so in allergy, something completely harmless is identified as foe. In autoimmune disease, friend is mistaken for foe and attacked. So a healthy cell is being attacked by the immune system. In cases of cancer, you've got cells that should have been taken care of that are not attacked because they were mistaken for friend. And so in all three cases, it's friend and foe recognition is the ability that has somehow gone awry. And so particularly in the case of abrupt onset allergy, which does occur. So you got some guy, he's 42 years old, he's been eating peanut butter every day of his life since he was able to eat solid food. And then one day he goes to a Chinese restaurant, there's some peanuts in the dish, and he has an anaphylactic reaction. And you're like, what the hell happened there? Yesterday peanuts were fine, but today peanuts are a problem. So what happened? And my way of thinking about it is the immune system changed its mind. So yesterday the immune system decided that peanuts were fine. Today the immune system decided that peanuts are no longer fine. And so it's made a different decision. That means the body makes decisions. And that may sound like an extraordinary thing, but I can't see how you could explain it any other way than the body's making bad decisions. So if the body can make a bad decision, then it can make a decision. And so what the hell is that? How does the body make decisions? But it seems to me that you can't explain those three things, allergy, cancer, and autoimmune disease, without acknowledging that somewhere in there's this decision, friend or foe. And if that decision's wrong, then it has consequences. And so I can't even begin to imagine how that works. How does the body make decisions? But I think it does. And I think one of our great advantages as acupuncturists is the body can make decisions that are not the same as what we were suggesting. And so we stick a needle in stomach 36 and we suggest that the stomach acidity should increase. But the stomach acidity is already either okay or too high. And so the body goes, oh, no, not doing that. No way. And it drops the acidity. And so it does something that was the opposite of our intent, but always leaning in the direction of balance towards homeostasis. And so that's why we have so few serious adverse events with acupuncture, because if we suggest something to the body that it doesn't like, it just goes, oh, no, not doing that. And whereas in other therapies, the body doesn't get to choose.
Yes, it moves in a more lockstep way. Although I have to tell you, I've been learning and I've been practicing some Sa'am acupuncture over the past couple of years. It relies on the four needle technique, which is a very powerful way of moving qi.
Yeah.
Using the five phases, you basically turn on a meridian and you turn off all the controls. It's extremely non-harmonizing. And if it's exactly what a person needs, you can get tremendous results. If you have incorrectly diagnosed and you've now tonified an excess, you will cause problems. I have seen some pretty remarkable adverse events because I did the wrong points. You can reverse it. You can catch it. You can reverse it. But this idea of the five phases, it's very powerful. And again, I have found if you tonify the mother of an organ and then you tonify it on its own channel and then you turn off all the controls, a lot can happen that's good. Things can happen that are definitely negative. But I would agree, by and large, acupuncture is often very regulating. And I like this idea, John, of the body making, it just makes a decision. I'm thinking of just myself as a human being, all kinds of different paths I've followed in life, things that I've done. Sometimes I just flat out change my dang life. It's like, yep, I'm making a decision to do this. I'm not going to do that. I'm doing this. And off I go. My life is in a different direction. That's a more psycho-emotive choice, but it dramatically changes my life. I can tell you that. It might even change my diet, my clothes, and my haircut. So the idea that at a more physical level, more earth level, let's call it, making a decision. Yeah, I like the idea. I'm gonna play around with that in clinic because there's something like intuitively sensical about that. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm convinced that one of these days in the study of physiology, somebody is actually going to get a handle on how that friend and foe recognition system works. What is the mechanism? What's the clockwork behind that? What's happening behind those friend and foe recognition decisions? And they are decisions because there's clear evidence that when you make good decisions, it makes you healthy, and when you make bad decisions, it makes you sick. And so if we can get a handle on what that decision-making process is, how friend and foe recognition works, then suddenly we've got the answer to three major categories, which is basically our contemporary illnesses. So without getting too much into another topic, a body clock is another sort of really strong interest of mine. And so the body clock rules all the other systems. And there is a body clock in every nucleus of every cell in the body. And so that alone allows the potential for systems of communication from one end of the body to the other, which doesn't have to do necessarily with nerves, blood vessels, or even channels. It's a resonance, if you like. And so I am thinking that that's a possible explanation for how some points can have influences on every body system simultaneously, like stomach 36, for example. There's examples of every body system being influenced in some way by stomach 36 or having the potential to be. And so again, in terms of the decisions, it's kind of like uh, stomach 36. Here's the menu for the day. What would you like? And it goes, I think I'll have a bit of reducing stomach acidity, and I think I'll have a bit of anti-inflammation for the gums and teeth, and it sort of chooses from these more than 100 dishes that you're serving up. It chooses which ones it wants right now and orders those. That really can only be coordinated by from some central point. There's got to be a point of convergence from which all of those things spread out. And my candidate for that is the body clock system.
Now, when you say body clock, you're talking the Chinese Zulu clock, like the clock opposites? No.
No, I'm talking about period and cryptochrome. I'm talking about BMAL1. I'm talking about how the circadian clock governed by the suprachiasmatic nucleus works in coordinating every cell in the body. And it's kind of a central control system, but it also is a central control system that takes feedback from every other cell. And so the light influences the suprachiasmatic nucleus and says, okay, it's time to go to sleep. But if you're doing a 2 a.m. gym or you're eating at 2 a.m., then those cells are going to send feedback back to the brain about, no, you're wrong. It's not sleepy time yet, because eating will delay the melatonin release and exercise will delay the melatonin release. And so you got a ruler who's not in charge. You got a ruler who takes feedback from every other cell, and some of those signals can override the rule from the suprachiasmatic nucleus. But if the suprachiasmatic nucleus controls every other cell and every other system in the body, then it makes sense that that's the likely point from which all these other things emerge. And so that would lead me to the hypothesis that acupuncture directly influences the circadian clock system, and then that system deals with all of the other systems in the body. And again, in terms of Yangsheng to me basically is body clock regulation. It's exactly how you do body clock regulation. Regular times to go to sleep, regular times to wake up, regular times to eat, eating the same type of food at the same time of day so that the right enzymes are lined up ready. So you've got your lipases and your proteases ready for when you've got your protein and your fat, and so on. And so a well-regulated lifestyle gives you a well-regulated body clock, which is, to me, the foundation of health.
You were talking, there's a particular part of the brain that you were just saying is the nucleus of this?
It's the suprachiasmatic nucleus. So the optic chiasma is because of the Greek letter chi, which it looks like an X. So that's where the optic nerves cross over, just sort of behind the forehead there. And the suprachiasmatic nucleus is the nucleus that sits right on top of that chiasma. And so it sits on top of the optic chiasm. And yeah, a lot of people will associate that with the third eye.
Isn't the pituitary gland in there?
It's
close by?
It's connected to, but it's not the same thing. And so there's a direct connection from the suprachiasmatic nucleus to the pituitary, but it's not it's not the same thing. And the thing that influences the suprachiasmatic nucleus most immediately and directly is light, but also feedback from eating and exercise. And so the things that set the body clock, they call them Zeitgebers, the things that set the body clock, light, exercise, and eating. And and sleep, of course, is tied up with that light exposure. And so where does the obesity epidemic come from? Excessive exposure to light in hours of darkness. And so screen time causes obesity. It drops the leptin and increases the ghrelin, resets the appetite. And that's because you've just told your body the day is longer than it is. So your body needs to up the caloric intake to make it through that longer day.
We have created such a unique set of problems with our incredible unique set of solutions.
Yes.
I think about this. I talk to patients about this too. Natural rhythms and this and that. Well, there was a time in the winter we'd go to sleep at 5 because it was dark and it was cold and we didn't have much food, so we slept more. And I got to tell you, I, for one, am really happy I've got a thermostat that I can set the house to springtime on.
Yeah.
And I love having light at 10 o'clock at night because I like to read. So these modern conveniences that, as far as I'm concerned, they do make my life better. I get it that at the same time, because of evolution, and these are fairly new innovations, we sometimes pay a price. So yeah, maybe this is partly where that dysregulation comes from, that causes this friend and foe in the body to make these different decisions. I'm thinking back to that woman you were talking about who I can't walk because I don't like throwing parties, so I can't walk, right? Her not walking was a solution to the problem that she had. And so many of life's wonderful conveniences. I'm sitting here looking at a computer screen that's a little bit bright, right? And we're having a conversation across the world and time zones. For God's sake, we're in different days as we speak.
Yeah.
It's a miracle. I am grateful for it.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, it causes it could be part of what causes this dysregulation that we see in modern life. And yet at the same time, it brings us so much benefit.
Well, I think it's a matter of managing the benefit. And so the research on sleep in particular says that the two most important things are going to sleep at the same time every day, every night, and waking up at the same time. And the waking up time is the more important. And so entrained time of waking, they call it in the research, that is the point at which the body clock sets for the day. So you open your eyes and the body clock goes, right, the day starts here, and everything sets to that moment. And the better regulated your body clock, the better every system works. And so my definition of health is when every cell in every organ and tissue is running on the same time, like a Swiss clock shop. Every clock at the same time. And that's what the Suwon talks about when it's talking about harmony. It's like, hey guys, let's all set our clocks to the same time. Liver and spleen, let's run on the same time. Let's harmonize the liver and
I get it. Yeah. That, John, that makes a lot of sense to me. And the experience that I know I've had with acupuncture in receiving it, and the experience I watch my patients have, they go so often into that deep, quiet repose that resets them. They'll often use that word. They come out of a treatment, you look at them, they're more coherent. Their posture's different, their eyes are different, their face is more relaxed, their breathing is different. Yes, I think you're right. It resets all those different clocks. It resets the clocks in the kingdom.
Yeah, well, that's another slide in a lot of my presentations is I put it up, light, eating, exercise. Oh, and by the way, acupuncture is a Zeitgeber too. And it is. There's clear evidence now that acupuncture on kidney 6 and bladder 62, famous points for insomnia, actually modify the proteins and genes in the suprachiasmatic nucleus itself. So we have direct laboratory evidence that acupuncture resets the body clock.
Look at you. You ran away from psychology because the laboratory was not the place you wanted to hang out. Now you're an acupuncturist and you're going, hey, the laboratory is kind of useful sometimes.
Absolutely. I love laboratory work, particularly when somebody else is doing it. I like
Amen, brother.
research.
I appreciate people doing that, but I don't want to do it.
Well, my Ph.D. was 9 years of my life, and 3 years of that was treatment. And so I treated 1,300 treatments in that 3-year period. And I never want to do that again. That was really big. 2 years to do all the data, spreadsheets and analysis.
Oh my goodness! Now, what was your PhD on?
On allergic rhinitis.
Oh yes, that's right. You already mentioned
immune
that.
changes associated with.
Yeah.
So I learned an enormous amount about physiology in a very short time. It was quite a steep learning curve. My principal supervisor was a 30-year research immunologist, and I had to sort of start from scratch, and it was really intimidating.
Good on you for taking on something like that. It's fun to take something like acupuncture and, well, how does this actually measure up? Let's take a look. Let's try this out.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what did you find?
Our question was, what changes in the immune system account for the changes in symptoms? And so what we found was changes in the immune system that didn't account for the changes in symptoms. And so my sort of next hypothesis, if you like, is we were looking at short-term changes which somehow accumulate into a process that leads to a longer-term modulation. Because in our study, 4 weeks after the last treatment, people were better than they were on the last day of treatment. So the improvement kept rolling after the treatment stopped. So that's a long-term modulation because there's no further intervention, but people keep getting better and better. In other studies, it's been shown to roll out to at least 3 months, and at 6 months, it's starting to taper. But that's not substance P, which we're seeing the big changes in, because substance P changes all wash out within 24 to 48 hours. And so it's similar to the difference between endogenous opioids and modulation of the nervous system in chronic pain. All of the endogenous opioids have all washed out in 24, 48 hours. They're all gone. So the beta endorphin's gone, the dynorphin's gone, the enkephalins, the endomorphins, they're all gone in 24, 48 hours. And so they're not what makes the lasting change. But somehow, by repeatedly stimulating those short-term modulators, they somehow create lasting change in the nervous system. And so I'm saying similarly, that's probably what's happening with the immune system, the substance P, the VIP, the other things that go down but don't stay down for very long, somehow create a lasting modulation. Basically, up to week 6, so it was 12 weeks of treatment. 8 weeks of treatment, 12 weeks was the follow-up. And at week 6, the substance P started coming back up again. But the symptoms kept going down. And so that was why it was clear that the substance P alone was not enough to explain why the symptoms are improving. So it dropped 77.78% in the first 24 hours. I mean, that's pretty impressive.
Not insignificant.
But it didn't stay down. And so somehow...
And yet modulation continued.
Yes. So somehow dropping substance P, VIP, and whatever else leads to the immune system changing itself in a way that lasts for months. And like in chronic pain, there's been numerous studies now where they've found that at 12 months after the last treatment, people have still got 85, 90% of the pain relief that they had on the last day of treatment. And so it's a pretty long-term change in the nervous system.
Well, my friend, one thing for sure, in this business that we're in, you're never going to be bored.
Absolutely not. Yep. Still got to know more about that, man. Still got to know more.
I know. It's far out. Well, thank you for your time today. This has really been a treat. I'm so grateful for this opportunity to sit down and puzzle over the use of the 5 phases with the emotions and just to get your perspective on things. I love this idea of the body makes a decision. I'm not sure how to make sense of it yet, other than that seems like a potentially fruitful thing to look into. So I'll keep you posted.
Yeah, well, like on the one hand, it sounds like an absurd idea, but then on the other hand, it seems like it's an inescapable idea because the evidence of it is staring us in the face. And so it seems almost impossible to deny it, but to say it sounds really crazy at the same time. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's okay. We're acupuncturists. We're already a little whacked. All right, my friend. Until next time, then.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you for having me on.
That people with staunch beliefs are the most easy to brainwash, that was a surprise to me. But when John pointed out that the idea is not to change the structure of belief, but rather the content, that rang true. And it helps me to understand how entire masses of people can seem to lose their collective mind, as we've seen demonstrated time and again throughout history. As a clinician, I think about how to use that dynamic to help my patients out of the dead ends that they've worked themselves into. Maybe I'm trotting on that ethical territory that John talks about in terms of it not being okay to trick our patients, even if it's in the service of helping them out of their problems. And furthermore, it reminds me that any potent technology, in this case, the Sheng and Ke cycles of the 5 phases, because it works for the most part outside of awareness, it can be seen as manipulative. There is a lot that goes on under conscious awareness, and a lot that's connected to culture, status, and belief. The technology of acupuncture? Yeah, man, it's far out. Well, here we are at the end of this episode. If you've listened up to this point, you're either a rabid fan of Qiological or the forward button on your podcast player stopped working. If you are indeed a fan of the podcast, you can help us to bring new episodes to our community of practitioners by supporting us with a membership or a one-time contribution. Details, of course, are on the website. That's it for today, friends. Join us again next Tuesday for another thoughtful episode of Qiological.